Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and this is Scraptastic. I enjoy crafting, have since the age of 2, bouncing on my mom's knee at her sewing machine. I did get into paper crafting though. We grew up very poor, so we didn't have a whole lot of resources, so I used anything and everything that we could. And in my eyes, everything has value, especially scraps that people like to throw away. So I collect scraps, my own scraps from other people. I actually go thrift shopping and collect scraps from the art recycle stores that we have in the area. These are my smaller bins of my scraps that I categorize by color, and just these cheap dollar store pencil cases or pencil holders. But I do try to get the colors organized so I can keep them organized and at my fingertips. They do stay on my desktop at all times. Now, we all have fancy tools that we like to use. I try to stay simple as we can. But where I do have some fun things, we can use those as well. Nothing fancy here. We are just going to do our best and show you some fun things you can do with scraps. The one thing I like to do with my smaller scraps, I like to do T cards with these small strips. I do keep them categorized by color, so you can see that I make all different colors just by using the smallest strips that most people would throw away. These then can be used later on to put on card fronts, accent pieces, or even small cards themselves. They are about the size of a trading card, but these are considered T cards. I am a thrifter. As I said, I am also very cheap when it comes to crafting supplies. I try to make my pennies squeal. So I do get a lot of supplies wherever I can. A friend got these for me off of Temu, which are just small cards that we can use then to put on the strips here. Now I do them in 2 different methods. I do a zigzag and I also do straight across. Whatever you have available, whatever looks best, but you can make a beautiful rainbow. So today I'm just gonna go through and make some of these cards with you. Stick around if you like to see more. Like if you enjoy using scraps yourselves. Leave a comment. Let me know what you enjoy doing with your scraps, or if you have scraps that you don't know what to do with. I do follow Mindless Crafting with Tracy and Bill. Unfortunately, this weekend it's my birthday weekend, so I am going to be out of the area for their scrapathon this Saturday, which is March 29th, 2025. But I'll be watching the replay and of course using some of my scraps afterwards. So as I said, I use a lot of scraps. I have these separated in bins. So I usually pick out a bin of a color that I am working with or that I like to work with and put it on one of the cards that I have. I have a couple colored cards here, but as I said, I do have these black cards here that I can use as well. So I like using black cards, so I'll just pull out a couple of these. I like using black cards just in case there's space in between that is missed, or they're not as straight, that you can just easily use it as an accent. So nothing fancy. Strips, I do use Barely Art glue. It is my preferred glue, just because it dries quickly and it has nice tack. I do have a little tip on there. Looks like I may need to refill my glue soon, but we'll have her at the ready. I also use a lot of recycled material. You'll see every now and then a pattern paper coming through from a inside of an envelope. Love using insides of envelopes. Never knew the bill collectors cared for my crafting as much as I did by sending me beautiful free paper every month. But why throw something away when it has use? So I'm going to work with purple. It is my favorite color, so I do enjoy working with it quite often. When organizing my scraps, I actually recognized some of the scraps from about 13 years ago when I got married and did my own wedding. So it was quite interesting to look through the scraps and walk down memory lane of if you can remember when you did last use them. So we just start putting on a little bit of glue. I'm just going to do a diagonal first. You secure that down. And you get your next strip out. Now I do like to create interest with different colors, different textures. Just depends on what scraps you have laying around. Now sometimes if they're larger pieces like this, and I do say larger pieces, but this is just a little bit over an inch, but some people would throw this away. Not for me to throw away, so I will actually cut it down into strips with my fun trimmer. And even that small piece that I just cut off to make it straight, I will save that and use that as well. But as of right now, I'm just going to do a diagonal. You can choose to do it straight up next to each other, or you can also leave space in between, which leaves a nice accent, especially with using a black background. I think this one I will use leaving a gap in between, just because I like that black in between there. Now these are fairly inexpensive, fun to make. They add great accent pieces. I'm going to be pulling out my cutter a little bit every now and then because I use a lot of my scraps up doing the example cards. Unfortunately, scraps can be addicting, and you always can find more wherever you look. I actually now have coworkers at work that save envelopes for me and bring me envelopes randomly, saying that they think that this is an awesome color or pattern that they've never seen before. But of course, I have turned them on to looking at the patterns of paper in envelopes because they never really thought of looking at that before as anything to use in crafts. So it's interesting to see my coworkers come to me with paper and patterns and be all excited. I don't have many crafting friends locally, so I just kind of go with the flow. And if they're interested in giving me some free supplies, I'm all for it as well. But it's always fun seeing people's excitement when they find something that they haven't noticed before, or something that they feel is different. So it's always a learning curve and a fun experience for all. I always try to give them one or two of my cards that I make from their items, just so they can see that nice things can be made out of others people's trash. So you can see that was just an offcut, so I'm just still using that thin stripe. One thing nice about the art glitter glue is that it does dry clear. So even though there's a little bit of overflow there, it still will dry clear for me. If you're watching, if you'd like to leave a comment, please do. Let me know that if you enjoy using scraps, or if you are a card maker or a scrapbooker. I actually did start scrapbooking when I was younger. I actually got very into rubber stamps. When I was younger, I was first introduced to them when I was in high school. I was working at a flower shop, which is actually my first vocation. I was in high school at the same time as well. I was an awkward kid. As I said, we didn't grow up very wealthy. So I didn't have very much in common with other people. So I kind of stayed to myself a lot. But, you know, you muddle through and you move on. And the one day my boss at the flower shop came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to go to a stamp party?" Now, I, being a sheltered kid, was very surprised when she asked me to a stamp party. I was very surprised at all being invited anywhere, especially by my boss. I had collected postage stamps from the time I was 4 years old with my grandmother, and had a very active, growing postage stamp collection. So I was very surprised to see anybody, especially at my place of work, that enjoyed postage stamp collecting as well, because of course we just called them stamps. So she told me that it was $15 for the class, which, you know, I was working, so I had paychecks of my own. I didn't have to ask my mom for any money, which she probably wouldn't have given me. So I agreed to go. I was very excited to go. She picked me up. We went to the party, and here it was, a dozen of terrific stamps stamp party. Being a crafter, even at that age, I was intrigued and bitten after that first visit there. They were still a little bit pricey for me, being a kid, first job in high school and all that kind of fun stuff. You know, it was just a little pricey. And as I said, my mom wasn't going to help me with the cost, so I had to fend for myself. So I did. I bought a few stamp sets and started crafting with them, and I just fell in love. After that, I was looking everywhere for stamps, and at that time that was all wood-mounted stamps, which I still have my very first sets. Still to this day, I probably have close to 10,000 rubber stamps. As I got older, I just kept collecting them, and now that they are going into more of the silicone stamps, you see the wood-mounted ones going up for auction and in thrift stores and different places. So I always snatch them up. I have since then turned over to silicone myself, but still always love those wood-mounted stamps. But they take up a lot of room. They take up a lot of time. Time marched on. I ended up going to college. Ended up dropping out of college because it just wasn't for me. I already had my horticulture degree, so I decided to keep working. as a florist. And I actually did that for 14 years. Put a little bit of the crafting on the back burner, but did it when I could. Still thoroughly enjoyed it. Enjoyed making pages for people. My family itself never really took photos, so it was hard for me to scrapbook since we never had photos to scrapbook. So I really did thrive on scrapping other people's memories, which, is fun up until a point where kind of it's no longer fun. So I kind of fell out of love with scrapbooking, and my rubber stamps and all my crafting supplies kind of went by the wayside for a while. I actually left florist after 14 years, went into retail management, had a few health concerns. Actually, I started down my journey of diabetes, which I went misdiagnosed and actually ended up losing half of my one foot. And I am down to no toes on my one foot and only half of my other foot. During that time, I did put myself back through school to get my medical assistance license, which at the partial amputation, I had to basically give up because I could no longer stand and walk and do the things that you needed to do in order to be a full-fledged medical assistant. So to this day, I still work in a medical office. I schedule surgeries for people, but I have recently gotten back into my crafting, which I thoroughly enjoy. And I guess that came about, a resurgence came about, well, I hate to say it, but around COVID 2020. That is when I had my transmetatarsal amputation, and I had to be off of my feet for close to 6 months. So it was hard, having to social space between people, and everything was shutting down. Recovery was really hard, and I found myself needing more. We had family, we had friends, I had my husband, but I just needed more. So I went back to my crafting. When I got married, I was able to have a craft room. Very privileged of having a craft room. It is a mess. I am a through and through craft collector. Not so much a user back then. So I had amassed a great amount of supplies. So you see here, I trimmed off the edges of that card, which make it take shape and define it, which is awesome. These little scraps, yes, I will dispose of these scraps. Even though some people say you can still use these, the diehards will still use those, I am not. That's a little bit too little for me. But as I said, I was just hungering for more. I am rounding the edges. I just like a clean edge on my card, which, there we go. So I got myself back into my crafting, and I haven't looked back. And actually during that time is when I found Mindless Crafting and Bill and Tracy, and I do say that they have gotten me through a very tough time, as they did for a lot of people. who were kind of lost during 2020. And since then, I continue to follow them because they continue to encourage people to be more, to do more, and to be them, which is always nice. And I don't always get that support at home or at work. So recently, I've been using more and more scraps and doing a little bit more and more of my card making. I'm getting back into things. So I figured, hey, if Bill and Tracy can do a YouTube channel, maybe I can too. So the only way you know is if you give it a go. So here I am with my Scraptastic self. There is no fancy editing, no fancy anything. Just me and my phone doing some crafty business. So finish that first card off. Looks good. Still going to use some of these scraps that are left over here. I pulled out my detail scissors just because it has a smaller blade and I like just clipping off edges. Now this one I'm going to do more of a kind of a stylized zigzag type pattern, where you can use smaller strips. When you go straight across, you have to have the longer pieces of the strips, but when you get down to when you cut off the ends, you still have these beautiful usable strips. So you have to come up with some way to do it. Recently, I've been trying to tell myself if I sit down and do a craft, I have to finish off the scraps that I either created or do something with them. Because as I said, I am a craft collector. So I have plenty of stuff, but I just can't pull myself to throw things out, which is kind of a sickness, and then you get overwhelmed. So here we are. So with this, you're kind of just doing like a herringbone type style, going back and forth, still leaving little spaces in between, taking various colors and fitting them in the spaces that are available. And if anybody's available this Saturday, Bill and Tracy are going to be live at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for their scrap-a-thon. As I said, I'm very bummed that I am not going to be available. It's my birthday weekends. My birthday was actually yesterday, and my husband, who's a school teacher, has a part-time job also with an auctioneer, and he actually signed up for the auction setting up that night, and was very upset because he didn't get to take me out. So we will be going out plant shopping and thrift shopping for what else? Craft supplies. I have been on a no craft buy since January. It is my New Year's resolution to have a no craft buy. I've actually done well. I did give myself a reprieve during the month of March, since it is National Craft Month and my birthday. So I figured I'll give myself a little bit of a break so I can go to craft places and have a little bit of fun during my special month. So that's what we'll be doing on Saturday instead of watching the scrap-a-thon. But I will be watching the reruns, and I will be, at that point, getting back out my scraps and doing a little bit more of my piecing together some of my scraps. Now, sometimes I know we all hit brick walls when it comes to our creativity. Heavens, do I know that. But recently, even when I can't come and complete a full card, I've been trying to come up and make little bits and pieces of maybe that later on I can throw on a sentiment or put it on the face of a card and send out. Haven't had the urge or the want to kind of craft a whole lot recently. So you do what you can to get you back in the swing of things. So that this is what I've been doing. I've been making these little pieces. Now you can see here, I'm just cutting it with my scissors. This is how frugal I am. These are pieces that were left over after I had digital printed some items. I cut out the piece that was from the digital print, and there were strips like that left over, but me being me, I wasn't able to part with it. So this is now its new life. No scrap left behind. And you just keep going back and forth, putting colors in where they fit. I don't really measure anything in the sense of actually measuring. You'll see me marking with my finger so I can put glue up to a certain point. I do have a silicone mat here, a cheapy one from the $1.25 store, the $1.25 store as I affectionately call it, which is dirty and does need to be cleaned, but I try not to even waste my glue by putting it in places where it doesn't need to be. So I try to get that the best I can. So that's why you'll see me measuring up with my finger and kind of just hitting it with my finger of where I need to stop with the glue. Now, I am not picky about the glue usually. I've just recently, within the past 2 years, started with the Barely Art glue, and absolutely adore it now. But before, I was Aleene's, Elmer's, anything that you could get for an affordable price. Now, the only thing with Elmer's is that it has a high water content, which when you make cards, it doesn't lay flat. It actually will warp your card because of the water content. So unfortunately I try to stay away from that. Aleene's has a higher water content, but not as high as Elmer's. Affordable, but doesn't sit well with all kinds of the crafting. Now, there's a whole bunch of other glues, stronger glues, weaker glues. I just fell into art glitter glue, or not art, sorry, barely art glue. And like that, enjoy using that, and that's what I got. Plus, my husband got me a refill for Christmas, so I have plenty now to last me probably the year. So you're going to go back and forth on here, staggering the sizes and the colors. Whatever fits in spaces. I do try to repeat colors just so there is some flow through the piece to keep your eye moving throughout. Some cohesiveness. And sometimes if you're running low on scraps or that color scrap, you may be able to cut off around the edges as you go so that you have that color to continue with throughout your piece. So see, I just cut that off down there. Now I do want this on this side, but as you can see that it's not long enough to meet that edge. So I'm going to put something else on that side to bring up the size a little bit. So recording and making videos is something very different to me, very foreign to me. I usually craft with either music on or something playing in the background. And it's kind of a little weird sitting here talking to yourself. But it's an adventure. And we all need adventures now and then. You can see how that black inner space between the purple gives a little bit of depth to the pieces. I also am a huge quilt lover. The one thing that I have planned for future videos, if we get to that, is to actually do quilt blocks out of paper piecing. As I said, I started crafting at a ripe old age of 2 years old on my mom's knee. My mom was a licensed seamstress, and she would sew with me on her knee, and I absolutely fell in love with sewing and her machine. I actually got my first sewing machine at the age of 5, and I still have it to this day. It's still my favorite machine. It's one that I probably will never get rid of, and I actually just bought another one of the same model, which is a Singer Featherweight, at auction, because I know my baby is not going to be around forever, and they don't make the parts anymore, and she's going to need parts. So I bought one at auction so that I could have parts for her if or when she breaks down. So I have a sister model of my featherweight waiting in the wings. Okay, let's see if I have. I can see it's a lot of piecing together, a lot of using your little scraps up. One thing nice about using liquid glue, it does give you wiggle room that you can slide things into place. I do use double-sided adhesive tape. It's not my favorite just because it doesn't give you the wiggle room that you need sometimes, and it's expensive. But I will use it. Sometimes for these cards, if I have the sheets of the double-sided adhesive, I will actually just put sheets of the double-sided adhesive down on paper and then butt it up next to each other to make it go faster. But usually if I do that, I'm on a mission. I need to get something completed very quickly. But the joy in crafting for me is actually feeling the paper between your fingers, placing it on the paper, moving things into place, making it look good. Not 100% mindless like Tracy and Bill, and never thoughtless, but still that's my happy point. But growing up with sewing machines and the love of sewing machines, I also grew up in Pennsylvania, in the heart of Amish community near Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Very heavy into the Amish and Mennonite. So as we would drive through the countryside, we often came across laundry lines just full with quilts. Went to mud sales, which is basically a sale that a lot of the local fire companies run at the beginning of spring, where a lot of people donate items to be sold, and it usually benefits either the fire company or a certain group. But they're called mud auctions for a reason, because it's usually in a field, and it being early spring, you're usually covered in mud. But a lot of times quilts are there. So I actually started collecting quilts as a teenager, and I have quite a few quilts. I have tried to assemble a few. I don't quite have the patience for it. So I will do quick quilts. I did a lot of sewing with my church group growing up. We would have a sewing circle, which now has disbanded. Unfortunately, the older lady of the church have unfortunately started dying off. But that was a joy growing up. But so I started collecting quilts, and when I see handmade quilts, I will try to purchase them if I can. A lot of times they're outside of my price range, but you do what you can. So I do own a couple. I find the quilt blocks intriguing. I love the stories behind them. And once again, these little scraps that I cut off, I am disposing of these. I have a little trash bag to my side here. And I'm going to round the corners. But as I said, I love quilts, and I love the meaning behind them. I love the passion that goes into them. So I actually do a lot of my scrap cards with quilt patterns. So that is one thing that I would like to do if I decide to continue doing the channel. But this is what you get when you put all those scraps to good work. Now that can be put on the front of a card, which later on maybe I will come back on and actually make these into a card. But for right now, I'm actually going to continue doing some more of these cards, try to use a little bit more of these scraps, and we'll see you later. Thanks for tuning in.